when mind is excessively dependent on carbonic food, then that addiction has some qualities. There are some characteristics of that addiction. One is that mind will become more and more obsessed with physical things, will search more and more for physical objects of gratification. And in its search, it will want to own them. Own them. Owning something means of course we can own many things, and there's different ways of owning things. People can own a land and say, this is my land, and identify with that property. And people can own a land, which is a necessity if you want to have a piece of land, or if you want to have a house, or if you want to have a car. You have to own them, but not feel that it is yours. Not feel that that is your property, but feel that there is a purpose why you are using it. You're making use of it. You're taking its service, and you're giving it, possibly, hopefully, also some service. But the psychology of ownership is the result of the excessive, the mind which is excessively dependent on carbonic food. The mind which is excessively obsessed by the world, by the objects of physicality. Because there is a satisfaction in that case, in owning. Owning then extends to controlling. And it's really pathetic if you think of how human beings feel very proud because they own and they control. If they don't own so much, at least they want to, if nobody listens to them, if they have nobody to dictate their terms on, if they cannot have somebody who will follow whatever they want, they will have a pet, perhaps. A pet at least can be counted on to be owned and controlled. If that pet is not there, they can have a remote control, so they can still have some control over the channels, and they can control whether they watch one series of commercials or another series of commercials. But that I'm joking about this, but the psychology of control runs very deep in the human psyche. And I'd like to stop a little bit and talk about control, because it is found that when people are not controlling by nature, one would say, oh, this person is not very controlling. And yet you'll find that more often than not, there are some spheres in life where they do want to have control and they do want to have the final say. And if they are not allowed to have their final say, then it is a problem. So there is a time when control is a necessity and it is actually desirable. And there is a time when control is not necessary and detrimental. The psychology of control is different from needing to control a machine in order to get some work done. The psychology of control that I'm referring to is the state of mind of wanting to impose oneself on something or someone else. That unnatural imposition, which is all too common, of one person over something or someone, that I call the psychology of control. And that is runs very deep in the human psyche. Why? Because it's nurtured by the carbonic food, which most people, most of us, abundantly consume. So it becomes very difficult to become free from the plague of wanting to exert one's influence unduly over others. Unduly over others. Control. Control means that someone controls and someone is controlled. When there is oppression, it means suppression. It means somebody suppresses and somebody is suppressed. And the two are part of the same equation. Actually, the three, we should say, because the controller and the controlled, the oppressed and the oppressor, they are within the umbrella of control. They are both victims of control. They're both victims of suppression. They are just playing different roles, but they're both trained in the ways of control. And that's why we find that there are times when somebody is very non-resistant, that does not resist to an attempt of controlling him. Somebody goes and works in an office, and the boss or some colleague are very controlling. And this person just chooses, for the sake of peaceful living, just chooses to swallow everything and just be quiet, even though it's unfair and uncomfortable and unpleasant. So this person accepts to be controlled, accepts perhaps even to be suppressed or oppressed. But that same person who accepted to be suppressed or oppressed maybe goes home and controls a member of the family and oppresses a member of the family. It's the same person. Or it's the typical classic example of a people or a group, a social group that have been persecuted. And then later on, when they become free from the situation in which they were persecuted, later on they themselves become the new oppressors. They themselves become the new controllers, the tyrants. It's classic. Why? Because no one is just a control person. No one is just somebody who controls. The psychology of control makes one victim of control in one of the two roles. Maybe one is a predominant role. The person who behaves tyrannically may do that generally and is less likely to be controlled by others. But if that person finds somebody whose tyranny and strength is greater, that person will submit to them. So it's the psychology of control. Why is it so important for us to understand this? Because we are tossed, we swing between one and the other. Yes, in minor ways, probably there's nobody tyrannizing over us at least in our private life, in our personal life. Surely there's tyrannical forces over us that control our social life, the political life. There is no doubt about that. We accept that. So in part we accept we are controlled. In part we control. But why is it so important, I think, to understand this? Because there can be no mental balance as long as this situation of control exists for us. As long as it is still an issue in our mental arena, there will be no mental composure.